Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for my presentation, 10 native weeds for 20 butterflies. Other than being an employee here at the Naples Preserve, I am also the current interim president for the Naples chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society. And I originally developed this presentation for the Florida Native Plant Society almost a year ago. This is a little bit about my background before we get started. I did grow up in Naples. I got a master's in environmental science from Florida Gulf Coast University. I've worked as an environmental educator and a gardener at a few different organizations here locally, besides the Naples Preserve, previously at Naples Botanical Garden and 6 Mile Cypress Slough Preserve, which is in Fort Myers. I mentioned I'm the interim president for the Naples chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society, and we are one of the local community partners for the Naples Preserve, so you can find some native plant gardening information inside our eco center here. I'm also an active volunteer for the North American Butterfly Association. I volunteered for over a dozen butterfly counts across South Florida, from Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary over to Everglades National Park. So you can see that two of my passions are native plants and butterflies, and I get to bring the two together in this presentation. Here's the main outline for what we're going to talk about today. I will give you a definition for what I mean by native weeds. We'll do a review of butterfly needs and the butterfly life cycle. Then I'll get into the core list of 10 native weeds for 20 butterflies. And then I'll give you some tips for how to manage weedy native plants that serve butterflies in your home landscape. And I'll share plenty of resources with you also. When I was first creating this presentation for the Florida Native Plant Society, I had three main objectives. I wanted to encourage us to start thinking differently about some plants that we may consider weeds and we may have thought about as weeds for a long time. I know that was the case for me for a few of the plants that I'm going to share with you. When I was growing up, I just thought they were weeds in the lawn. I didn't realize they were native plants or that they were needed by butterflies. This presentation gives me a chance to highlight some of the lesser known butterflies in our area. Some of them are quite small, like the gray hair streak shown in this picture, but some of them are larger, flashy butterflies as well. And the last objective for creating this presentation was to be able to share more ways, in addition to traditional butterfly gardening, that we can still help butterflies out in our home landscapes. And it might be more of a matter of identifying plants that are already in your yard, rather than having to go out and purchase plants as butterfly host plants. So let's start off with a little quiz here. What is a native plant before we talk about what is a native weed? I have it as multiple choice. So is a native plant any plant found in Florida? Is it any plant found in the Florida wilderness area? Or is it any plant that was present in Florida at the time of initial European contact? Take a moment to consider those three options. We'll go through each of them individually. A native plant, is it any plant found in Florida? Well, not quite. Many of us are very aware of exotic plants from other countries that we can grow in our gardens here in Florida because of our subtropical climate. We're also very aware of different invasive plants that are from other countries as well. So the first one, A, is not the definition of a native plant. What about B? Any plant found in a Florida wilderness area. This sounds better because native plants are found in the wilderness, in our native ecosystems, like the pine flatwoods and the oak scrub here at the Naples Preserve. But we know as well that, unfortunately, invasive plants from other places have made their way to Florida through a variety of means. And those invasive plants are present in our wilderness areas too. So B is not the correct definition for a native plant. As we've gotten to by process of elimination, it is C, any plant that was present in Florida at the time of initial European contact. And this is the definition that is used by the Florida Native Plant Society. And by initial European contact, of course, we mean at the time that European explorers hundreds of years ago first made contact with the part of the country that is now Florida, plants that were there at that time, part of the historical record. To the best of everyone's knowledge, those were the plants that evolved in Florida and our native ecosystems. So that is the definition of a native plant that we'll use moving forward. Of course, as I mentioned before, a lot of them are found in our native habitats, like the pine flatwood shown in the photo here. There are a lot of native plant species in Florida, 3,300 species. So about 1/3 of those 3,300 species of native plants in Florida are grown in cultivation. So basically that means those are the species that you could go to a native plant nursery, maybe a traditional plant nursery as well, and purchase those kinds of native plants. And that's the route that we use if we want to create a butterfly garden. We'll usually go to a native plant nursery, purchase some nectar plants and host plants for butterflies and plant them at home. But the flip side of that fraction is that 2/3 of Florida's native plants only occur in the wild. They're not being cultivated at this time, so you can't go out and buy them in a native plant nursery. And if you're curious about where I got those fractions from, I went to the website of the Florida Association of Native Nurseries, and that's the last link shown in the purple sources band at the bottom of this slide. So again, if only 2/3 of the Florida native plant species, not only, but 2/3 of them occur only in the wild, you can't buy them in native plant nurseries, that shows you the significance of being able to identify the native plants that you already have in your yard or on your property, or maybe in your favorite park or preserve area, knowing what you need to conserve that is going to be used by butterflies or other wildlife. Okay, so I think we're clear on what I mean by a native plant. But today's presentation is about native weeds. So now we also need to talk about what is a weed. Generally, a weed is any plant that is not valued where it is growing. Weeds usually show up uninvited in our gardens. They sprout up and grow on their own without us gardeners or property owners choosing to put that plant there. And weeds are often thought of as messy or annoying. They might create a lot of seeds that stick to our clothes when we try to weed the weeds out of our gardens. Or they might just pop up all over the place and be very difficult to keep up with. But interestingly, a weed can be a native plant. It can be a non-native or exotic plant, or it could even be an invasive plant, meaning that it's made it onto the invasive species list for Florida. And those invasive species cause negative problems in our native ecosystems. But interestingly, to keep in mind, weeds can be invasive plants, they can be non-native plants, or they can be native to Florida, but viewed by gardeners as weeds. So yes, some weedy plants are native to the state of Florida. They naturally occur in Florida's habitats and disturbed lands, including places like roadsides, trail edges, and vacant lots. And the weedy native plants have certain characteristics in common that allow them to thrive in these disturbed or dynamic conditions. And if you think about it, it is kind of a good thing that we do have some native plants with these weedy tendencies, with these characteristics that will allow them to thrive in disturbed conditions. Otherwise, the disturbed lands on the side of the road, vacant lots, places that might be cleared for a new development, those disturbed areas would end up with only invasive plants, which as I mentioned before, they can cause negative problems in our native ecosystems. So what are these characteristics shared by weedy native plants? They tend to have a high germination rate, and that means that of all of the seeds that fall on the ground from this plant, there's a really good chance that most or all of those seeds will grow into seedlings. The weedy natives are quick to bloom and set seeds, so that means that it doesn't take a lot of time for the plant to become mature enough to create flowers or seeds. They create large numbers of seeds, and they have effective means of seed dispersal. And the example that I have here in the photo, these are the seeds of Spanish needles, a white and yellow wildflower that is a weedy native. And these are the seeds that are produced after the flowers have been pollinated. So you can see they look like little sticks with two prongs at the end. These are the two prongs here, and they can stick onto our socks, onto the sleeves of our shirts when we're trying to do some weeding in our gardens. And then eventually we might feel the pokes of those two prongs coming up against our skin. And then, oh, I know that makes me want to pick them all off immediately. But if I'm hot and tired from working in the garden, I might be tempted to drop the seeds on the ground. But of course, if I did that, that would be a new patch of Spanish needles in the garden. So of course, it is always best if you don't want to spread the seeds to put them in the trash instead. There's a couple of other characteristics shared by some of these weedy native plants, especially the ones that are resources for butterflies. So for a moment, imagine you are a butterfly. You can pick your favorite kind of butterfly. And these weedy native plants have characteristics such as persistence in the environment and dependability. So what do I mean by that? Again, thinking from the butterfly's perspective, why are weedy host plants in particular beneficial to butterflies? And in just a moment, I will define host plant in particular for the butterflies. So the weedy natives can thrive in places where many butterflies are active. That tends to be open sites and full sun. The weedy native plants, because there's so many of them, require less search time for discovery by a female butterfly that might be looking for places to lay her eggs. And then beyond reducing the time it takes to find the host plants, because the weedy natives are so plentiful, they provide lots of egg laying sites and lots of caterpillar food. So that brings us to a quick review for a couple of types of plants that butterflies need. These types of plants are familiar to a lot of people, so I'll just do a quick review here. Butterflies need nectar plants and host plants. Host plants can also serve as nectar plants sometimes, so these definitions are not always mutually exclusive. But the nectar plant is what is sought out by the adult butterfly so that they can drink the nectar from the flower and give themselves energy to keep flying around and doing their daily activities. The host plant is the type of plant that the female butterfly looks for to lay her eggs on, and it's the kind of plant that the the caterpillars eat as they are in the eating and growing part of their life cycle. And of course, the classic example of a butterfly and its host plant is the monarchs and the milkweed, which, don't worry, they will be included in my list of weedy natives for butterflies. And I also wanted to do a quick review of the butterfly life cycle since we're talking about host plants. Again, the host plant is the plant that the female butterfly looks for to lay her eggs. You can see a couple of yellow elongated eggs right on the tips of the leaves in this photo. And butterfly eggs, as you can imagine, or you've seen if you found some in your gardens, they are very small. They're generally the size of a period at the end of a sentence. And when the caterpillar hatches from that egg, as you can imagine, at first, the caterpillar is about the size of the egg that it hatched from. But the main job of the caterpillar is to eat the leaves or other new growth on its host plant, the same plant that its egg was on when it hatched. And these caterpillars eat and grow and shed their skin along the way as they grow. But the final time that a caterpillar has reached its full size and it sheds its skin one final time is when it reveals the chrysalis. And this is the phase of the butterfly's life cycle where all of those major changes are happening inside the chrysalis. And because the chrysalis is not mobile during this part of its life cycle, it often takes on a camouflaged appearance. A lot of chrysalids look simply like dried up old leaves hanging off of a plant stem, although they can make their chrysalis in other locations as well. But after the internal changes are done happening inside the chrysalis, what opens up and emerges from the chrysalis won't be anything that looks like the previous caterpillar. It'll look like a brand new creature, the creature with 4 wings that can fly around and look for nectar plants. And that, of course, is the butterfly. In the photo shown here, this is the zebra heliconian. It is a common butterfly in our area, and it happens to be Florida's state butterfly. So as a final review, yes, butterflies need 2 different kinds of plants, the nectar plants for the adult butterflies and the host plants for egg laying and caterpillar food. You can see on the right here, the host plant for Florida state butterfly, the zebra heliconian, are the passion vines. This is a corky stem passion vine in this photo, which is very common in Collier County. Yes, and the native host and nectar plants are the best resources for our butterflies because they have co-evolved together in Florida for such a long time. The particular leaf chemistry and different kinds of resources found in the plants, those are best tailored to the butterflies that we have here that are native to Florida. Okay, so we have completed our background information for this presentation, and we're going to get started with the list of 10 native weeds for 20 butterflies. I will go through an individual profile for each of these 10 native weeds and introduce you to most of the 20 butterflies that rely on them. Before moving into the list, though, I wanted to explain how I put the plant list together. And when I was thinking about what kinds of plants I wanted to include, I realized that there were 2 different types of native weeds that I wanted to talk about. Type 1 are the plants with the word weed in the common name, but they're already accepted as a desirable plant, especially for butterfly gardens. So milkweed is an example of type 1. But I realized also that there were other kinds of plants that I wanted to include, and those are type 2, the native plants often considered lawn weeds and not widely known as native or as butterfly host plants. And as I was putting the list together, I found that more of the plants were actually in the type 2 category than in the type 1. So you'll see that as we move forward, but we will be starting off with plants with the word weed in the common name, but they are accepted as desirable garden plants. So we got to start off with milkweed. I've referred to it a couple of times already, and I think almost everybody is familiar with milkweeds as butterfly plants for the monarchs in particular. And milkweeds, there is good diversity here in Florida. There's 21 native species. There's about 8 or 9 species for Collier County in particular. The one in the photo here is the pink swamp milkweed. You can see this in places like Big Cypress National Preserve or Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. The milkweed flowers are very distinctive. They have this structure at the top of the flower. Looks like a little crown, doesn't it? It's called a corona. That's very distinctive for the milkweed flowers. Besides attracting a wide variety of pollinators, the milkweed is, of course, host plant for the monarch butterfly, but for 2 other kinds of butterflies as well, both the queen and the soldier. And I like to refer to them as the milkweed trio. Here is the monarch butterfly, probably the continent's most famous butterfly, if not worldwide. Of course, the monarch, it's a large orange butterfly with black veins and black borders around the edges of the wings filled with white spots. You can see I've included maps here. These are sightings that were reported to butterflies and moths of North America. So you can see the general places where the butterflies are found, where people have reported seeing them anyway. So when the monarch is looking for milkweed, the female will lay white eggs singly or individually underneath the leaves, underneath the milkweed leaves, or even on the flowers. This is a picture of a monarch caterpillar. It is yellow, white, and black striped with 2 pairs of black filaments. So we have the filaments both at the back and the front of the caterpillar. And that will be important when I show you another kind of caterpillar shortly. Many people are aware as well that milkweed plants have toxins called cardiac glycosides. And when the caterpillars eat the leaves from the milkweed, they are accumulating that toxin in their body. As far as I know, it doesn't necessarily harm the caterpillar if, they're not accumulating really high quantities. But it makes the caterpillar distasteful to any predators, like birds that might try to eat them. And the caterpillar, those toxins even protect it as it transforms into a butterfly. That makes it distasteful then as well. So I wanted to show you the 2 other butterflies that also rely on milkweed as a host plant. They look very similar to the monarch, although the coloring is more in the chestnut brown category than orange, in my opinion. And you can see both of these, the queen and the soldier butterfly in South Florida. Left off the map here for the soldier, but it's more of a South Florida specialty butterfly. And if you want to know if you're looking at a queen or a soldier butterfly, you want to look for this row of white spots. They look like eraser marks to me on the underside of the hind wing of the soldier butterfly. Those eraser marks are not present on the queen butterfly. And then here I have a comparison between the caterpillars for the monarch on the left and the queen on the right. You'll remember I mentioned we have the 2 pairs of black filaments on the monarch caterpillar. But if we count those filaments on the queen, we have 1 pair, 2 pair, and 3 pairs on the queen caterpillar. So that is an easy way to tell apart the monarch and the queen caterpillars. And I really love this photo on the right because it gives you a good sense of scale for how small the caterpillars can be, but they can be completely hiding underneath one of the milkweed flowers. The milkweed in this picture is called few flower milkweed, one of the natives that can be found in our wetlands like Big Cypress National Preserve. Before we move on to our next native weed for butterflies, I wanted to touch on scarlet milkweed, also called tropical milkweed. This one is not native to Florida, although it is most widely available for purchase at traditional garden centers. You can see there's a couple of color forms. There's an orange and yellow flower form on the left and an all yellow flower form on the right. So these are both scarlet milkweed or tropical milkweed, 2 names for the same thing. And if you are gardening with the scarlet milkweed, there's a couple of recommendations to allow it to serve the butterflies, but to reduce the chances of this non-native milkweed escaping into our natural areas. For one thing, it's recommended to remove the seed pods from the plants if you find them. So the seed pods can get a couple of inches long. They'll start to break open and show some fluff attached to the seeds. So you do want to remove them so that the seeds don't float away into our natural areas. And another recommendation is to completely cut back these milkweeds to the ground in November or in the fall, because this mimics the natural dormant time for our native milkweeds. And just because you don't see the milkweed above ground, it actually is surviving as the rootstock underneath the ground. And the tropical milkweed in particular will start to grow back pretty quickly. A couple of reasons why you want to mimic the natural dormant period of the native milkweeds by cutting back scarlet milkweed is that it won't potentially distract any monarchs that may be migratory and passing by our area. It won't distract them to try to go into the reproductive phase and lay eggs on this milkweed. And also by cutting it back, it clears out a parasite known as OE that may be accumulating on the plants that does have negative impacts on the monarch's development. So that's just a quick treatment of the scarlet milkweed. And then from now on, we'll be focusing back on the native species. Number 2 here is blue porterweed. Blue porterweed is a low-growing shrub, only gets a couple of feet tall. It can spread out kind of like a ground cover, and it creates these long flower spikes that have small purple flowers that grow off of them. If you are a native plant gardener, you've probably used blue porterweed. It's an excellent nectar plant. But perhaps less widely known is that blue porterweed is also a host plant, and that's for the tropical buckeye butterfly. The tropical buckeye looks quite similar to the common buckeye that we often see in Collier County. However, the tropical buckeye is really a super South Florida specialty species. And you can recognize that it's a tropical buckeye if you get to see the underside of the hind wing. There's this light brown vertical stripe that runs underneath the eye spots. So that can help you identify it as the tropical rather than the common buckeye. So this is one of the species we may not see. I haven't seen it in Collier County, but you never know with changing climate conditions. There may be a possibility to see the tropical buckeye someday. in Southwest Florida, especially if the blue porterweed, its host plant, continues to be used so much in our landscaping. The females lay green eggs on the leaves of the blue porterweed, and the caterpillars are black in color and spiny. In this case, I didn't have my own photo of a tropical buckeye caterpillar, and I wasn't able to find a photo freely available online. So that's why there's no photo on the slide. However, there's this excellent book called Florida Butterfly Caterpillars and Their Host Plants by Menno, Butler, and Hall. And I use this book on a weekly basis that has photos of all of Florida's butterfly caterpillars and a list of the Florida specific host plants for them. And they'll even tell you if the host plant changes between North Florida and South Florida. So this is a really useful resource for Florida butterfly caterpillars. Moving on now to our third weedy native plant for butterflies. This is turkey tangle fogfruit. This is a spreading brown cover that you can see can be present in our lawns. This is one of those plants that when I was growing up, I just always thought it was a weed in the lawn. And it took me, until I started learning more about our native butterflies to find out, oh, this is a native plant and it's a host plant for several kinds of butterflies. That includes the white peacock and the Phaon crescent, which you'll get to see shortly. But also sometimes this is one of the host plants for the common buckeye, shown in the photo right here. If turkey tangle fogfruit is too much of a mouthful for you, which it's a lot to say, you can call it match heads if you prefer. That's an alternative common name for this plant. And when you see the flower head up close, you can see the resemblance to a matchstick with the skinny stem and then the rounded purplish color flower head here. The flowers appear around the flower head, and they start off white and then fade to this nice lavender color. Besides being a host plant, this is yet another very popular nectar plant for us. This is something that I got to see on a field trip, and I like to call it a turkey tangle patch that was in a homeowner's yard. So this is just to give you an idea if you are slowly starting to reduce the size of your lawn, changing it over to native ground covers perhaps instead of grasses. This is just a really cool example of what you can do with turkey tangle fogfruit, and a good place to look for caterpillars from the butterflies that use it. One of those butterflies that uses turkey tangle fogfruit is the white peacock. This butterfly has been super plentiful this year in Collier County. I've been helping with butterfly counts at 3 of our Collier County parks, both in the summertime and in the fall. We did a couple of counts, and the white peacock beat out all the other species for abundance. You can see on the map the white peacock. There's a lot of sightings of it, especially coastal parts of Florida. The butterflies lay green eggs individually on the leaves of their host plant. The caterpillars are black and spiny with a pair of horns coming off of the head here. And this photo, I actually saw this caterpillar walking along the railing heading up to the Eco Center here at the Naples Preserve. And many of you probably know there's another host plant for the white peacock called Herb of Grace, as you can see down here. It's a low-growing, kind of succulent-feeling plant with small white flowers. It tends to grow along pond and lake edges, and there is Herb of Grace in the dragonfly pond here outside of the Eco Center. This is the other butterfly that uses turkey tangle fogfruit as a host plant. This is a much smaller butterfly. It's called the Phaon crescent, and it's a very beautiful, intricately patterned butterfly. You can see the orange and the lighter yellow bands across the forewings and all of the intricate black patterns on the wings. The Phaon crescent does occur across the state of Florida. The females lay greenish yellow eggs in clusters underneath the leaves of turkey tangle fog fruit. So this is the first instance where I've said the eggs are being laid in clusters as opposed to one at a time randomly over the plant. So if you find eggs on a host plant and you find them in clusters or individually, that can be something to help you figure out what kind of butterfly it might have been to lay those eggs. For the Phaon crescent, the caterpillar is small and brown with pale stripes, and they may feed in groups within a silk nest. So if you see some kind of silken structure on the turkey tangle fog fruit, there could be caterpillars of the Phaon crescent in there, and that's another hint that your host plant may be being used by the Phaon crescent. Okay, from this point forward, I'm going to be focusing on the type 2 of the native weeds. These are the plants that may already be present in your yard, but you probably won't find them to buy in native plant nurseries. So to kick things off for this section, it's the Virginia pepperweed. Virginia pepperweed is very plentiful across the state of Florida. You can see the map over here. And it is in bloom right now in my yard at home. Another common name for Virginia pepperweed is poor man's pepper. And if you look down the flower spike, you see the tiny white flowers at the top of the spike. But as you start looking down, this is where the flowers used to be. But when they were pollinated, they're starting to change to the seed instead. And doesn't it look like a flat pepper flake? So these have been used as an alternative to red pepper flakes. I haven't tried that personally, but I have read that in a couple of resources. The Virginia pepperweed is in the mustard family. So if you're familiar with the white butterflies, like the checkered white or the cabbage white, you may already know that they use cabbages and other plants in the mustard family. For us, I would say the most common butterfly in the white family that we see in Collier County is the great southern white. Here's a picture of the great southern white. It's a medium-sized white butterfly with some dark edges on the forewings. Probably the coolest thing to see on this butterfly, if you look at the tips of the antennas, they are turquoise in color. So it's really neat to be able to see that in person. You might need to see the butterfly spending some time on a flower to get some nectar and snap a picture or look at it with binoculars. But I've been able to see the turquoise antennal clubs with the naked eye also. Females of the great southern white lay slender, pale eggs singly or in small groups on the host plant. The caterpillars are green with yellow stripes and black spots, as you can see in the photo towards the bottom. And the young caterpillars may feed in groups. So that gives you an idea of what to look for around the Virginia pepperweed. And this was something very interesting that I came across in my yard. This was after the Virginia pepperweed had bloomed and set its seeds. And you can see on these old sticks from the Virginia pepperweed, the seeds are all gone. But I found a mating pair of mallow scrub hair streaks perched on the end of the old Virginia pepperweed. So that just gives you an idea of, even if the plant has no more leaves on it, it has no flowers, butterflies and other kinds of wildlife may still have a reason or a need to use this remaining plant structure. Moving on now to number 5, the Florida pellitory. This is one that I was not familiar with at all before I started gardening actually at Naples Botanical Garden, but since then I found it in my yard at home too. It's a rather nondescript plant. It's really soft in texture. I definitely recommend that you wear gloves if you're going to handle this plant though. It is in the nettle family and they tend to have stinging hairs on them. I haven't personally come across that on the Florida pellitory, but just knowing that's the family it belongs to, you want to be cautious. It tends to grow in moist, shady sites is where I've encountered it. It has really small flowers that occur underneath the leaves. So you really only see the flowers if you're looking for them. So maybe the most remarkable thing about this plant is it's one of the hosts for the red admiral, which is a very remarkable looking butterfly. And a butterfly that I wish I saw more often in Collier County. If you see the map here, the red admiral can be seen anywhere really in the state of Florida and elsewhere in the country. It's this boldly colored black butterfly with reddish orange bands and white spots at the tips of the forewings. The last time I saw this butterfly was in a butterfly count for Big Cypress National Preserve. We saw it right in front of the Oasis Visitor Center. And that would have been in July, if I remember correctly. Very special sighting. The females for the red admirals lay pale green eggs singly on top of the leaves of the host plant. So that can be the Florida pellitory, or it could be some other plants in the nettle family, such as false nettle or heartleaf nettle, are a couple of native examples. As you can see in the photo of the caterpillar, they are spiny looking, dark colored with yellow or white markings, especially towards the bottom of the body. And they too can make shelters by tying leaves together with silk. So remember, if you see a structure that's made out of silk on something, a plant that you know to be a butterfly host plant, might be giving you a hint as to what kind of butterfly is using it. Number 6 now in our list of native weeds for butterflies is the hairy pod cowpea. This is the first vine that we've talked about in this list. It's a vine in the pea family. And as we move along in the list, you'll start to see that plants in the pea family tend to be hosts for a few different kinds of butterflies. For the hairy pod cowpea, that includes the Cassius blue, the Serranus blue, the gray hairstreak, and the long-tailed skipper. The hairy pod cowpea is found widely across Collier County. I most recently saw it on a butterfly hike at Eagle Lakes Community Park. It has the bright yellow flower and the big wide banner petal at the top. That is pretty characteristic of flowers in the pea family. And they're called hairy pod cowpea because the pea pods that are developed are, yes, hairy on the outside. So now that we have a group of butterflies associated with this host plant, just in the interest of time, I'm only going to introduce you to one of those butterflies. This is the Cassius blue. This is a very small butterfly, about the size of a blueberry is a good way to remember it. The Cassius blue can be seen across the state of Florida. The female lays flat, pale green eggs singly on the flower buds of the host plant, which is a little bit different than what we've been hearing about before. The caterpillar is small and slug-like, which basically means that the caterpillar doesn't have a distinctive head when you look at the caterpillar. And as the eggs were laid on the flower buds, when the caterpillars hatch from those eggs, they will eat the flower buds as well, and the imager seeds. And I find this just a funny picture of the Cassius blue. I just can't imagine, could it have found a more uncomfortable looking place to perch? you probably recognize it's on those two-pronged seeds of the Spanish needles. But yet another example of perhaps a use of native plants by butterflies that we don't always think about. Number 7 now are the tick trefoils, and this is a group of plants. They are a sprawling herb, a little bit like the vine. They can be on top of other types of plants sometimes. They are called tick trefoils because the seeds look a little bit like ticks, but they also stick really well onto your socks or onto your clothes. When I was a little kid running around the yard and brushed up against these seeds, I used to call them stick tights because they would stick really tightly to my socks or my pants, and I'd have to peel them off very carefully like Velcro. They really stick on there. There are actually 19 different native species of tick trefoils. There's also 5 non-native species that we can find. To translate the rest of the common name, the tick trefoil is referring to the 3 leaflets that are characteristic of these plants. So you can see in every instance here, there are 3 little leaflets that make up each leaf. And this is, again, a plant in the pea family, very widespread in Florida. It's a host for multiple kinds of butterflies, the gray hair streak, long-tailed skipper, and Durante's longtail. For this case, I'd like to introduce you to the long-tailed skipper. This is a medium-sized brown butterfly, has long tails, although sometimes their tails might be missing if it had an interaction with a potential predator. The top side of the butterfly, on top of its body, is this really shimmery turquoise color. The females lay pale yellow eggs singly or in short stacks, kind of like pancakes, on their host plants. You can see the caterpillar is green with yellow stripes and a very distinctive dark head. So this would not be one of the slug-like caterpillars. Again, they make shelters by folding leaf pieces over or by tying whole leaves together if the caterpillar is in one of the larger growth stages. Of course, in agriculture, there are a lot of different plants in the pea family that we as humans like to eat. And sometimes the long-tailed skipper will lay its eggs on the agricultural pea plants. And it's been nicknamed in that industry as the bean leaf roller. So if you hear that reference, it's the same insect as the long-tailed skipper. Now we're on to plant number 8. This is the purple thistle. This is probably one of my favorites, partially because my favorite color is purple, but for other reasons too. The purple thistle is an annual or short-lived wildflower. It can grow very tall, taller than me. I'm 5'2", which is not very tall, but it does get taller than me, it can. The flowers can be pinkish purple as shown here. Sometimes they can be white as well. And this is the kind of plant that you might not find in your yard, although I have found one in my yard before, but they tend to be on roadsides or in open pastures more often. The foliage is quite spiny. If you look at the leaf up close, you can see almost every angle of the leaf has a spine on it, either longer or shorter. So this is a kind of plant that you don't want to handle casually. And I remember being really surprised when I found out that the purple thistle, was the host plant for the little metalmark butterfly, as well as the painted lady. But I'm going to introduce you to the little metalmark. This is a butterfly that I don't see very often. I've only seen it in Big Cypress National Preserve. I haven't seen it in my home garden, even though I had that one purple thistle in my yard. This is a small butterfly. It reminds me a lot of a shiny penny. It has that coppery color. It has some iridescent blue on the wings, and it is a relatively small butterfly, a little smaller than the fan crescent that we talked about, but not quite as small as the Cassius blue, that is the size of a blueberry. The female little metal marks lay flat brown eggs underneath the leaves of the purple thistle, which as far as I know is its only host plant, at least in our part of Florida. When the caterpillars hatch, they become a whitish green with very long hairs, which I would love to see personally someday. And as the eggs are laid underneath the leaves, the caterpillars tend to eat the leaves from beneath as well. So they might eat off all of the plant tissue except the clear cuticle on top of the leaf. So if you're looking at the leaves of the purple thistle, look for small round windows in the leaves as evidence that the little metal mark caterpillars might be there. Besides being the host plant for the little metal mark and the painted lady, the purple thistle is an extremely popular nectar plant. You can see the glorious tiger swallowtail drinking some nectar from the purple thistle. And there's another kind of little critter on the purple thistle here too. And I have several different photos of multiple kinds of butterflies all at once trying to nectar on purple thistle. Here we are coming towards the end of our list of 10 native weeds for 20 butterflies. We are at number 9, the common fan petals. This is yet another one of those plants that when I was a little kid, I just overlooked it. I thought it was a weed in the yard. I came to learn later on that common fan petals is a native plant. It's in the same family as hibiscus. This plant can get up to about 3 feet tall, but if it's mowed regularly, as it can appear in our lawns, it does take to mowing quite well, and it will bloom when it's only a couple of inches tall. And it can bloom all year round. I have a lot of them blooming in my yard right now. Common fan petals is the host plant for the gray hair streak, the mallow scrub hair streak, and the checkered skippers, of which we have 2 species in Southwest Florida, both the tropical checkered skipper and the white checkered skipper. But I tend to have a thing for hair streaks, so I'm going to introduce you to the mallow scrub hair streak this time. If you were paying very close attention to the last slide, you might have seen that the hibiscus family is also called the mallow family. So the mallow scrub hair streak, it fits perfectly well, but its host plant is the common fan petals. This is a small gray butterfly, again about the size of a blueberry, like that Cassius blue. When I find mallow scrub hair streaks, I see them like this a lot, where they have the back of their wings up in the air, where their 2 hair-like tails are. So this is where they get the name hair streak. But the head is facing down, and even the antennae are folded downwards, like it's saying, pay attention back here, but don't look at me in the face or towards the head. And sometimes even these hair streaks will shuffle their hind wings back and forth to draw even more attention to where the tails are at the back end of their body. So if there were a predator nearby, a bird or a lizard or something that seemed like a predator, like a really interested butterfly watcher, then drawing attention to the hind wings may confuse the predator to try to take a bite out of the wing, thinking this is the head, but not bite off the head of the butterfly so it can get away and live at least another day. The mallow scrub hair streaks lay white eggs singly, again on the flower buds of the common fan petals. The caterpillars are slug-like, similarly to the Cassius blue. They can be variable in color, reddish or greenish. There is another native plant in the mallow family used by the mallow scrub hairstreak besides common fan petals, and that's a plant called Sleepy Morning, which appeared in my yard after Hurricane Irma came by. There were a few different plants that showed up in my yard for the first time after Hurricane Irma passed through. Here we are to number 10, the end of our list for 10 native weeds for 20 butterflies. Last but not least is Spanish needles, which we have talked about a little bit in the presentation already. The Spanish needles has those two-pronged seeds that get stuck on our clothes very easily. The flower looks a lot like a daisy. It is in the daisy family, along with sunflowers and other asters. It has these white, what look like petals around the outside and yellow florets in the middle here. An extremely popular nectar plant. I have photographic evidence of at least 32 different kinds of butterflies sitting on top of Spanish needles and very likely getting nectar from the Spanish needles. And I will show you a photo in a moment that kind of communicates how popular Spanish needles is as a nectar plant. But ahead of that, I wanted to show that Spanish needles is also a host plant for the dainty sulfur butterfly. This is the dainty sulfur. It is a small butterfly, roughly the size of a quarter. It's one of two small yellow butterflies that we see often in Collier County. The other one is the barred yellow. But you can confirm that this is the dainty sulfur by these dark spots on the underside of the forewing. The barred yellow does not have these spots. And the dainty sulfur females lay slender yellow eggs on the seedlings, specifically of Spanish needles. And there's been more than one occasion where I've been following around a dainty sulfur, either in my yard or at a park. I see it land on a small plant, not blooming, curl its abdomen under the leaf, and see it lay an egg. So that's been the dainty sulfur pointing out to me, this is a Spanish needle seedling here right in front of us. The caterpillars are green with a purple stripe, and they tend to rest on the stems of the Spanish needles, and you can see with that coloring that they would blend in very well on the stems of the host plant, the Spanish needles. This is that photo I was talking about that shows you how popular Spanish needles can be. We have a lot of action going on here. We have a queen butterfly getting nectar, a bee flying up to get some nectar, a bee that's already here on another flower. And I came across a quote in one of my native plant books called Everglades Wildflowers by Roger Hammer. And he introduced this plant in his book, and at the bottom of the comments, he said, "It's a weed worth growing," and I couldn't agree more. So I have taken you through my list of 10 native weeds for 20 butterflies. Again, those were 10 native host plants that many of them, they may already be in your yards or on your properties. And at this point, the question usually comes, if you have the plant, will the butterflies arrive? And the answer is, it depends. For most of the plants and butterflies we talked about today, Collier County is in the natural range of both the plants and the butterflies. So if you have the host plant, most likely you will see the butterfly find your plant eventually. But for some cases, like the tropical buckeye, this is the one that's mostly seen in the extreme southeast Florida area. It's less likely, even if you plant blue porterweed in your yard, that you would get any tropical buckeyes if you live here in Collier County. But again, you never know. There are instances where butterflies stray to Florida from the Caribbean islands. So potentially tropical buckeye could stray from southeast Florida to southwest Florida. You never know. So now that you have learned so much about native plants and host plants and some of the lesser known butterflies that live here with us in Collier County, you're probably thinking, wow, what more can I do to attract or support these butterflies in our area? I think it's very important to try to get familiar with both the native weeds and the non-native weeds in your area. If you confirm that you have some invasive plants on your property, like maybe you find seedlings of Brazilian pepper or Caesar weed, you definitely want to remove any of the invasive species. But get familiar with the native weeds that might be in your lawn as well. Then you want to start making some observations, just casually watching the wildlife that visits the plants in your yards. And you'll be able to confirm for yourself which of your native weeds are attracting butterflies. And are they drinking nectar? Or are you seeing them lay eggs potentially on the plants too? And I know that especially in Collier County, we have lots of different neighborhoods with different styles. You know, we have Golden Gate Estates, which is kind of more in a forested area. So there may be different ways that you like to maintain the appearance of your yard or your property. So if you like to have a more formal appearance, you could try allowing the native weeds at least to be in a back corner of your property that is not as easily visible. You might have the option to change the way that you're mowing your grass, depending on the season. Right now, we're in our dry season. So when it's not raining as often, the lawn is not growing as much or as quickly. So you do have the option to mow a little bit higher, let the grass and the other plants that are in your yard grow a little bit higher. And you can mow less frequently during the dry season too. And this just gives the butterflies a chance to complete their life cycle on the weedy host plants that could be present in your yard. Also, if you want to keep a more tidy appearance in your yard or in your garden, you could consider removing seed pods from the weedy native plants so they aren't spreading out beyond your control of where you want them to be in your yard. And you can also cut back any spent plants to have a more tidy appearance. But I put these pictures up here to encourage you to remember as well, even when we think the plant is done, it doesn't have leaves, it doesn't have flowers, butterflies still find reasons to perch on these plants. Finally, for the overall health of wildlife and ourselves as well, it's recommended to limit or cease herbicide use on your lawn to promote some ground cover diversity. So it's not simply a lawn with one kind of grass, but you are allowing some of these different native weeds to persist as ground covers as well. And from watching this presentation, I'm really appreciative that you were here with me today, or if you're watching the recording, it's wonderful. But beyond educating ourselves, it's really important to talk to your friends and your neighbors too. If you're going to try to make some of these changes in your yard to keep some native weeds for butterflies, you might need to talk to your neighbors to explain why your yard might be looking a little bit different. I also encourage you, if you're not already a member of your local chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society or the North American Butterfly Association, these are two great organizations to keep looking for more educational resources and to connect with other people who share your interests. So now I'm going to put on my Florida Native Plant Society hat. For those of you who might not be familiar with the organization, I'm showing you part of the website right now, fnps.org. There's a really great database that anyone can use to make a customized list of native plants for your particular location and site conditions. So again, if you go to fnps.org and you click on native plants at the top, you'll get this drop-down box, and you'll want to select native landscape plants for your area. And when you do that, you'll be starting to get into that database, and you'll want to click on find plants based on your location and needs. This will give you all different options to select to be specific about your location and site conditions. If you already know what plant you're looking for, you can use the search up here to find a specific plant. But for this example, let's say we clicked on find plants based on your location and needs. The next thing you're going to see is the location options. For this case, I clicked on Collier County because that's where I live and where I am right now. And then you'll have a bunch of other options that you can select. It can be about your site conditions, how much sun or shade you get, how dry or moist your soil is. But for this case, I just clicked on butterflies. We want plants that attract butterflies. So the only specifications I gave were Collier County and butterflies. And then let's see what our list of native plants is. So this is the list, just the top of the list that would come back. And it's a list of over 100 plants that are native, appropriate for Collier County, and attractive to butterflies. So if you have not explored the Florida Native Plant Society website before, I highly encourage you to do so. That brings me to some of the resources that I use all of the time to keep learning about native plants and butterflies. I mentioned the book on the left already. And then we also have one of the newest books is Native Plants for Florida Gardens. That one has a lot of gardening tips and propagation information for native plants. A Gardener's Guide to Florida's Native Plants was sponsored by the Florida Native Plant Society, so that's a great one. And then on the right, this is one of Roger Hammer's books. I mentioned Everglades wildflowers before, but he also did this complete guide to Florida wildflowers. You can look up more Florida native plant books, again, on the FNPS website. They have a book page that you can browse through. And of course, beyond books, there's a lot of other websites you can use for resources. Florida Native Plant Society, the Florida Plant Atlas is good if you want to look for which counties in Florida a plant may occur in. It also tells you if the plant is native, non-native, or even endemic, meaning occurring in Florida and nowhere else in the world. The Florida Wildflower Foundation is a great website. And the Institute for Regional Conservation can help you make a customized list of native plants for your zip code. So this is yet even more specific than looking at your county. And actually, the Florida Native Plant Society website is currently upgrading, so you can put your zip code in there as well. These are some butterfly websites. I mentioned Butterflies and Moths of North America. Those are where the sighting maps came from. eButterfly is another great website that's been developing and expanding its resources. I mentioned the North American Butterfly Association, reaching out to your closest chapter and getting involved in butterfly counts. That's a great, action way to get to know butterflies. The University of Florida McGuire Center for Lepidoptera is excellent if you want the latest butterfly research, and they also freely share butterfly brochures through the Florida Museum of Natural History. That brings me to the end of my presentation. If you would like to reach out to me after seeing this presentation, you can email me directly at naplesnativeplants@fnps.org. So we've got the email right up here, or you can visit the website for the Naples chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society, which is fnpsnaples.org. Thank you for attending.